Today's program is being recorded, as always, and soon it will be added to the Cat Center's YouTube channel, where we have posted most of our past programs as well. So if you're just discovering the Cat Center, you can explore all of the past things. You'll find a link to the YouTube channel in the chat. I think that's there already. And as we go on, what I'll do now is introduce our speaker. You should feel free to submit questions for the speaker at any time using the Q&A function in the bottom of your Zoom window. And we may not be able to get to all of them, but I will do my best to represent the range of questions. So don't be shy, put them in, we'll read them. We'll love seeing that you're there and you're listening and you're thinking. Today's program, here's Michael, is the first of a 6-part series that will continue all the way into February on the evolution of the wordless chant or singing known as Nigun. And we'll learn today about a little bit about its origins, and the series will bring us all the way up to interpretations of Nigunim in the present day. Today, I'm sincerely honored to be introducing one of our current fellows who I've had the pleasure of getting to know over recent weeks, Professor Michael Lukin. Michael joins the Cat Center this fall as a fellow hailing from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, but his path through the world of Jewish music, particularly Hasidic and Yiddish folk songs, has been lifelong, beginning in his youth in the Soviet Union. As a graduate of the Jerusalem Music Academy and a holder of a master's in Jewish music and a doctorate in ethnomusicology, if I'm correct about that, from Hebrew U, his knowledge of Jewish music truly is both broad and deep. He has taught at Hebrew U, at Bar Ilan, and at Sapir College, and he has been deservedly honored with various other prominent fellowships before the Cat Center, which is obviously the pinnacle, including serving as a Polanski Fellow at Oxford and Mandel Scolion Postdoctoral Fellow at Hebrew U. Without taking any more of his time away from him, I'll hand things over to Michael now, and I think that we are really in for an amazing journey through the world of early Nigunim. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can you hear me?
Can hear you well.
Great. So I'm really highly honored and glad to be here, and thank you very much for your invitation. And let me join you in your words. We are living in the most devastating times. The world has changed over the past month. And while mourning all those who perished and thinking constantly of the hostages and their families, and while praying for all those who are struggling to defend our home, our Jewish democratic state, as brave soldiers or just as civilians in their everyday life. While all this, I would like us to recall words penned in the middle of Holocaust in the Vilna Ghetto, written by the Yiddish poet Shmerke Kaczerginski for the children of the youth club there. His poem was set to music composed by Basia Rubin and became the hymn of the ghetto youth. I would like us to remind just a short excerpt from that song. It goes like this. Mir gedenken alle Sonim, mir dermonen alle Freund, ewig wollen mir verbinden, unser Nächten mitten Heind. We remember all our enemies and we never forget all our friends. We will connect forever our past with our present. I think in these moments of shock, grief, and hope, we must try to recall the connection between the past, present, and future as emphasized by Kaczerginski in The Ghetto. And this is why I find our meeting today especially meaningful. Our topic is one of the most prominent symbols of Hasidism, the Hasidic songs or Nigunim. These are chants of mystical background, often sung without words to meaningless syllables such as Ai-Dee-Dai or Yam-Bim-Bom. In this idiosyncratic way, Nigunim represent a whole philosophy and fulfill numerous functions in the Hasidic way of life, singing while dancing, eating, studying, praying, or just contemplating nature. The reason for performing songs without the lyrics is the belief that while words would disturb and prevent sincerity, without the need to memorize any text, the sounds will just come out of the heart. And the reason for performing these tunes vocally without instrumental accompaniment is twofold. First, the most suitable time for this music is Sabbath, when playing instruments is forbidden. And second, singing is the most natural way of making music, requiring no training or knowledge, especially if no words are required. Accordingly, most Nigunim are accessible to everyone. Let's learn one such nigun. It was recorded on a wax cylinder in Western Ukraine, just on the eve of the World War I, as early as 1913. It is important to remember that until those years, transmission of Nigunim was possible only from mouth to mouth as an oral tradition. Only towards the end of the 19th century did ethnographers, musicians, and Hasidim themselves begin to write these tunes down and later on record them as sound. The performer attributed this nigun to the founder of the Chabad dynasty, Rebbe Shneur Zalman of Liadi. This rare audio recording survived the upheavals of the 20th century. It has been digitized by Ukrainian institutions and is available on the website of the National Library of Ukraine in Kyiv. Let me share with you the notation. Okay, those of you who know how to read musical notation can follow me. I'm showing you now this nigun as it appears on the database of the Hasidic Nigunim that we created at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. So let's listen to it. Ai-Bye-Bye, Ai-Bye-Bye, Yam-Bim-Bom, Ai-Dee-Dai, Ai-Dee-Dai, Yan-dan-dan-dan-dan-dan-dan, Ai-Dee-Dai, da-da-dan-dan-dai, Dig-a-dai-dig-a-dai-dai-dai-dai, Ai-Dee-Dai, da-da-dan-dan-dai, Dig-a-dan-dan-dan-dai. Nai, nanai, 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 da-da-dai-dam, Ai-Dee-Dai, Ai-Dee-Dai, da-dan-dan-dai, da-dan-dan, dig-a-dig-a-dai, Yam-Bam-Bam, ba-bam-bam-bam, dam-bam-bam-bam, dam-da-da-dam, Yam-Bam-Bam, ba-ba-da-dam-bam-bam-ba, ay-ay-ay, Yam-Bam-Bai, da-dan-dan-dam, da-ga-dan-da-ga-dan-dan, da-da-dam, da-ga-da-ga-dam-ba, ay-dai-dai, dai-dai-dai-dai-dam. As I said, Nigunim like this represent in their idiosyncratic way the Hasidic philosophy. And the question that I would like to investigate together with you is how these two poles are interrelated. Hasidic thought, the ideas on the one hand, and the melodies, the musical sounds on the other. This question is interesting and important to explore for several reasons. First, today several thousands of such tunes are known, and their stylistic features are easy to recognize. Tracing the connection between the ideas and the actual sounds enables us to touch on the processes of the emergence of this rich and beautiful repertoire. Second, this discussion is intended to clarify whether every possible melody could be used as a Hasidic nigun or not, and then, if only some particular tunes are suitable, what exactly characterizes them? What criteria are required to tune into a nigun? Finally, a close examination of the melodies and their extra musical meanings opens a window on one of the less explored topics in Jewish culture, the contemplation of musical beauty. Jewish sources more often discuss other global questions, such as what to think, what to do. Indeed, the most frequently discussed topics in the rabbinical literature are what is true and false, right and erroneous, what is allowed and what is forbidden, etc. Much less attention is given in these texts to such questions as how to feel and how to contemplate emotions. And this is exactly where the Hasidic ideas and Hasidic tunes come in. The Nigunim enables us to sense how the Hasidic philosophical statements feel. In discussing the ideas and the melodies, we will refer first to history and discuss some early Hasidic books, like the two that you see here, and I will elaborate on these titles shortly. Second, we will refer to musical motives, forms, and other musical features. This discussion will be based on the sounds that we will hear. And finally, the third reference will be to the emotions, which can be sensed by listening to the music and reading the texts. And we start with history. As you know, Hasidic religious innovation emerged in the first half of the 18th century in the territories of the right bank, Ukraine. The most influential figure, generally considered as the founder of this spiritual revival, was Israel ben Eliezer, known as Baal Shem Tov, the Yiddish Hebrew nickname which meant the owner of the good holy name. This denomination symbolized a certain secret knowledge which was not available to everyone, but only to a few chosen individuals. And this knowledge assisted the Baal Shem Tov in re-examining the then accepted approach to the religious way of life and to worship. Interestingly, one of the metaphors that he used to outline his innovation was music. The following teaching of his is cited in the book Degel Machane Ephraim, published by his grandson, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Ephraim of Sudilkov. According to this parable, the ability to understand the Hasidic spirit resembles the inspiration by music, whereas the inability to do so is kind of spiritual deafness. What is more, this parable was pronounced by Baal Shem Tov to explain the biblical description of the revelation of the 10 commandments of the Mount of Sinai, no less, no more, so that the new Hasidic teaching is compared to new Torah, and both the giving of Torah and the Hasidic renovation of the religious way of life, both are symbolized by music. Let's see this text. The biblical verse describes the giving of Torah in the following way. All the people see the voices, the blare of the horn, and the mountain smoking. And the people saw it, fell back, and stood at a distance. Now, it is not quite clear from this excerpt what is the meaning of seeing the voices. Voices are usually heard, not seen. Another question that the Hasidic story refers to is, why is it important that they stood at a distance? I'm reading. Wait a minute. I'm reading. It should be interpreted in a way that I heard a parable from my grandfather of blessed memory. There was one who played extraordinarily well, with great sweetness and melodiousness, and those who heard this could not refrain from the magnitude of sweetness and pleasure, until they were dancing almost to the ceiling because of the magnitude of pleasure and pleasantness and sweetness. And whoever was closer and tried to get closer to hear the instrument had the most pleasure and would dance excitedly. And in the midst of this comes a deaf person who does not hear the sound of the sweet music at all. He just saw people dancing wildly, and they seemed to him to be crazy, and says in his heart, "What is the value of this foolish joy?" And truly, if he had been wise and knowledgeable and understood that this is because of the greatness of pleasure and pleasantness of the musical sound, he would have danced there as well. Several points are striking here. First of all, Baal Shem Tov is referring to some understanding, but it is not quite clear what exactly should be understood here. It seems that in this particular story, the understanding is somewhat intuitive. It is related to an emotive understanding rather to an intellectual one. The person described here was lacking the understanding of this pleasure of music that makes people dance. Moreover, the revelation of the new spirituality is compared to breaking the borders of the usual mundane routine and exposure to beauty. Consequently, the spiritual leader is compared to a gifted musician. This image clarifies that it is in fact possible to see the impact of the musical sounds on a person who understands the music. The biblical mentioning of the distance is also connected to this understanding. Those who are closer to the musician understand music better. Now, while applying to music, this teaching does not mention the Hasidic Nigunim, like the one that I sang to you. It rather refers to a different genre of Eastern European Jewish music, klezmer. Let's listen to a short example of this semi-professional art, klezmer music, and I will elaborate on that later. Craig Udelman and Mark Rubin will be playing for us in a minute. Since music plays a central role in this parable, we are able to draw some historical and music-related conclusions. Three of them are particularly significant. First, musical beauty has the highest prestige among other reasons because of its way of communicating. It is accessible to all ages, genders, and social layers, independently of the level of education. Reacting to music collectively is seen as a connecting factor. Music builds up a new community. Second, the musical ideal is neither a singing Hasidic leader nor a cantor, but rather a klezmer, the traditional instrumentalist. Chronologically, the art of klezmer crystallized 200 years before Hasidism. Today, we sometimes confuse these two different genres of music by Yiddish speakers, but we have to bear in mind significant differences between the two. Klezmorim, which is plural of klezmer, were semi-professional instrumentalists. Their musical training was controlled by their peers in the well-established guilds, the profession often being transmitted from father to son. In addition, klezmorim themselves were not necessarily very religious, and this art continued to flourish also outside the Hasidic courts, as it had flourished already since the turn of the 16th century, if not earlier. Placing a klezmer at the main focus of the most meaningful parable, while discussing the giving the Torah on Sinai and the accompanying spiritual revival, therefore means an reevaluation of the social hierarchies in the religious sphere. And the third important point is that klezmer music, unlike all other kinds of traditional repertoires by Yiddish speakers, is unrelated to any text. Traditionally, klezmorim used to play without any vocal accompaniment. Therefore, the reference to a klezmer hints that the lyrics, the text, and the textual logic argumentation are less important for the new Hasidic spirituality. In other words, this story tells of a musical choice. Klezmer music becomes the main source of inspiration of the new genre. Thanks to their special qualities, klezmer-like tunes are now being performed vocally. Hasidim sing those tunes that would earlier have been played instead. Finally, the fact that in this parable, the Baal Shem Tov mentions the klezmer and not singing Hasidim enables us to outline the historical context of this genre's emergence with more precision. In all probability, in the mid-18th century, singing wordless Hasidic songs was not yet a widely accepted practice, familiar to everyone. Our second story is also related to the Baal Shem Tov and his circle. This one does refer to singing Hasidic Nigunim, but the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov is in fact one of the earliest references to the phenomenon. Let me show this one. Okay, I'm reading. Once on Simchat Torah, the members of the holy group, the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov, or Besht, were dancing joyfully in a circle, and the Shekhinah was in flames about them. This doesn't happen every day. During the dance, the shoe of one of the lesser members of the group was torn. He was a poor man, and this is also significant. He was a poor man, lesser member, and it angered him that he was prevented from dancing with his friends and from rejoicing in the festivity of the mitzvah. The Besht's daughter, the pious Edel, who was also in the house, was standing on the side watching their celebration. She said to that disciple, "If you promise me that I will give birth to a baby boy this year, I will give you good shoes immediately." She could say this because she had shoes in the store. He promised her that she suddenly would have a baby boy. And so it was that the Rebbe, our teacher Baruch of the holy community of Tulchin, was born to her. At first glance, this story looks quite prosaic and mundane. It happens sometimes that shoes get torn as a result of overuse, so why not ask for a new pair of shoes if there is a store next door? However, a closer examination reveals some concealed levels and meanings. It is clear that this story, included in one of the most significant books of Hasidism, conveys an important message. It mentions two prominent characters, the daughter of the Baal Shem Tov and the birth of her son, who embodies the future of the Hasidic movement. Moreover, the story emphasizes the role of the ecstatic circle dance on the holiday of Simchat Torah, the way of dancing that is well known today, but was not known in Eastern Europe in the 18th century. The main form of celebration was the procession, accompanied by solo dances and acrobatics as it portrayed in these pictures. This is the reason for Edel's interest. She sees something relatively new and inspiring. Why is the future of the Hasidic movement, the new generation of Hasidism, linked to ecstatic dancing? The clue is the realm of imagination, expanding the boundaries of the everyday, just as in the previous example. This story reminds us of a folk tale, such as Cinderella, the little glass slipper. It is about the poorest person who arrives at a party in the house of the powerful leader, and then a shoe is exchanged between the poor person and the daughter of that leader. Along with this allusion to a folk tale and mentioning Shekhinah, God presence, which is an exceptional image, mentioning the shoes store transgresses boundaries as well. Jews who live in a traditional shtetl know that shops should be closed on the holidays. So bringing goods from the store in the middle of the holiday is an exceptional practice to a Jewish person. And all these features illuminate the main event, the heart of this story, the prolonged ecstatic dance as a new, unusual custom. The symbolic message of this story is striking. The new Hasidic Torah is transmitted from generation to generation through emotions and the imagination, through numerous associations, and less through the elitist knowledge of texts. These emotions and associations are inspired by various sources and aspects: folklore, mundane practices, sincere wishes such as the need to dance or a dream to have a baby boy, curiosity and open-mindedness. Now, since at the very center of this story is music, which makes this prolonged ecstatic dance possible, the question that arises is, what did they sing for such a long time? Obviously, their tune was familiar to all members of this group, the disciples of Baal Shem Tov, and must have been easy to sing, fast, rhythmic, and repetitive. In all probability, the whole group would sing it together, unlike the musical accompaniment of these Simchat Torah processions, where a soloist, like here, would lead most of the tune, and the group, people here or here, would join him in the refrains. I suggest also that the dancing described in this excerpt was already accompanied by wordless tunes. I think so just because it would be much easier to sing, Yam-Bim-Bom than Hebrew words, especially considering the novelty of this prolonged circle dance in those days. Let's keep in mind that unlike us who are used to the Simchat Torah dances and know the suitable Hebrew songs by heart, in all probability, these young first Hasidim didn't possess such knowledge. Before we proceed to the second part of our meeting, that is the discussion of the tunes and their musical features, let me wrap up the first part, the historical survey. As these two stories reveal, the Hasidic Nigunim just begins to emerge in the 18th century. Music symbolizes the new spirituality and at the same time enables new spiritual customs. Vocal performance of the klezmer music of the repertoire that had been created before the emergence of Hasidism appears to be the leading type of Hasidic music of that time. We will now listen to a short tune that accompanies a dance. It is quite possible that such a tune was referred to as accompanying the circle dance in the story that we have just read. It represents a consolidated style. Many features that we see here are shared by hundreds of Hasidic dance melodies. Let's see this voice. Let's examine the structure of this tune. As you can see, it includes 4 different parts or sections, designated in this picture by the letters A, B, C, B, A, B, C, B, yes? Meaning that the second part B is repeated after the most elevated part C here, okay? Each of these of these parts has its own nuance. The first one starts quite low. Then part B goes higher. And part C moves even higher. Even higher. This part C opens with a specific motive, kind of a signal. Such signals appear quite frequently in numerous nigunim. They can sound as die, 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 da, or die, 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 dam. Beyond that, in this part C of our nigun, a few new sounds appear, notes that we have not heard so far. For example, you can just see it, graphically. This sound between the third and the fourth line doesn't appear neither here in A nor in B. And according to the Hasidic belief, this structure reflects mystical contemplation of the name of God, which also consists of 4 letters. Yud Hey, here, Yud Hey Vav Hey, and in which the second and the fourth letter Hey, they are the same. This mysticism dictates a certain restraint, emphasized by a greatly limited number of different sounds in each section. Such a scarcity creates a religious atmosphere. This music is not made for pleasure or recreation, but rather for an ecstatic meditation. For example, the first section, part A, is built up of just 4 different notes. Da, 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 1, 2, 3, 4. And the fifth, this one, the fifth note appears only once. The next section, part B, adds only 2 new sounds to this stock of notes that can be used. So we see here again, da 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 da, but then comes one more here and one more here. Each of the 4 parts is repeated twice so that the whole melody develops quite slowly. All this maintains the feeling of moderation and an effort to concentrate. Such a nigun can be repeated over and over for half an hour. We won't practice a prolonged musical experience here, but nevertheless, I do propose that we listen to it one more time and recall the point that I have mentioned. And along with the playback of this tune, I will add some visual signs in this musical example so that those of us who read musical notation minimally can follow and see how the musical story unfolds. Let's sum up this brief discussion of music. During quite a short period of time, a few decades following the emergence of Hasidism, a new repertoire emerged. It has its own musical language, its own laws and means of expression. These tunes resemble instrumental klezmer music. They encourage contemplation. They are complex and create an image of spiritual development. They exemplify a journey. In the last part of our meeting, I would like to elaborate on the emotions evoked by the Hasidic nigun. As we saw, this music was created to represent a new teaching, to change the proportion between the focus on the written texts and other ways to connect to the truth and to a meaningful life. How should we listen to this music? What is the proper frame of reference in this case? To discuss this dimension, I would like us to examine the attitude to lyrics. We all recognize that songs usually do have some text. The Hasidic choice to sing without words is therefore thought-provoking. Moreover, this is not the only innovation concerning the use of lyrics. Another practice, also quite widespread in the Hasidic world, is kind of a play with the original words, interpreting them in an innovative manner, creating multilingual songs. This multilingual part of the Hasidic repertoire illuminates a surprising imagery, and this is why I would like us to look at such a multilingual Hasidic song and see what associations and emotions it evokes. This nigun is attributed to Rebbe Levi Yitzchok of Berdichev, who was a Hasidic leader and the official rabbi of the town of Berdichev, one of the largest Jewish communities in the Russian Empire, and at the same time a cantor. Excuse me. The song combines three languages marked on this slide by three different colors. The first component, colored in blue, is a medieval Hebrew poem, which resembles some biblical verses. The second component, colored in green, is the Yiddish word du, meaning you. And the third component, colored in pink, is a Yiddish Slavic lingual pun. Namely, in the Slavic languages, the expression to make do-do means to play a pipe, or a dudelsack, the bagpipe. At the same time, as I said, in Yiddish, this word means you, and it can be applied also to God. Therefore, from the non-Jewish Slavic perspective, the expression south do, north do means in the south can be heard the sound of the pipe, and likewise in the north can be heard that sound. However, in the Yiddish context, that same expression would mean in the south I can find you, and also in the north I can find you. So, while the Hebrew words introduce a theological idea that God can be found everywhere, the Yiddish and Slavic words exemplify the same idea, saying do, 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 in all possible locations, including above and below, east and west, you, the master of the universe, are present. And this presence is heard because it resembles music, do, 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 do. The attitude to the lyrics in these songs differs from that in the wordless Nigunim. After all, here we do have some words. At the same time, the song shares with other Nigunim a very special attitude to the words, examining them as if from the outside. The original text of the Hebrew poem is not sung as a whole unit, but rather turns into building blocks of a completely new song. And the sense that the actual lyrics shouldn't be understood literally, but rather as hints to something beyond their original meaning, is maintained also in the non-Hebrew parts of this song. Let's listen to it and note the idiosyncratic combination of longing, yearning, and some sadness with joy and humor. This nigun gives us some clues on informed listening to Hasidic music. This Dudu nigun is not made for pleasure, but requires active listening and spiritual participation. Its most striking feature, shared by numerous other nigunim, is the richness of associations. Mixing languages underlines this feature. Thanks to the combination of Hebrew, Yiddish, and reference to Eastern Slavic, non-Jewish vernaculars, different points of view meet: the holy and the mundane, the Jewish and the general regional, the sad and joyful, with each language bringing in its own perspective, its own context. It is no coincidence that these multifaceted meanings and associations emerged in the cultural realm of Eastern European Jews. Early Hasidic communities were always exposed to various cultures, languages, and values. These Jews constantly heard songs of the Ukrainian peasants, of the Polish church, and of the synagogue. In addition, since Jews lived in small towns rather than in villages, they also acquired pan-European urban music and valued it greatly. To give ourselves a more precise sense of this multicolored range of associations, let's examine the tune that we heard. It starts with motives that recall a prayer and then becomes rhythmic and joyful. Now, today we rarely recognize the extra musical meaning of this rhythmic tune, but 200 years ago and even 100 years ago, it would immediately recall a famous secular Yiddish wedding song which doesn't touch religious questions in any way. This is how a Hasidic nigun unites completely different worlds. The multiplicity of perspectives exists not only on the level of language, but also on the level of sounds. Let's listen to this wedding Yiddish song, sung by Sidi Tal, the famous Yiddish singer from Bukovina, and know that this tune is identical, that the tune that we will hear just now, to the one that we have just heard. So it's again bam bam ba ram bam ba da ram bam bam ba bam bam ba mizrach do ma'irav do und sofen do und doren do, and you will hear just the same melody in a minute.
Mir rein, den Morgenbad, spielt mir rein, auf Freilachkeit, die Kabitale und die Gute frei. Was denn alle auf Freilachkeit, die Kabitale und alle, was die Jute, a größtes war mir rein. Kein Gräser ist die, ist beim Namen nicht so,
I'm sorry, I think I forgot to share my screen. And so let's.
Tochter mein, Kind mein, die größte ist der Mama ist fein, so schönste Kind, bist du bei mir noch du. Die schöne Sonne, was Vater sagt, lange Zeit in Stub gescheint, Nämselen, bei mir riecht zu. Na Masel, dicker Schopf, soll in dir bei mir nehmen, und Glück soll bei dir mein Kind nur sein. Ich soll dich verlieren, mit dir nicht alles schämen, wirklich was edel und fein. Ich soll dich verlieren, mit dir nicht alles schämen, wirklich was edel und fein. Größtes war mir heim. Kein Gräser ist Simche, war Mama nicht so. Ihr Kind zu der der Kopf führen, in a guter Stoff, so spielt ihr euch das Morgenloch, lässig nicht und schön, soll sich werden, ist der Tanzen gehen. Spielt ihr euch das Morgenloch, lässig nicht und schön, soll sich werden, ist der Tanzen gehen.
This transference from a secular Yiddish song to a Hasidic nigun demonstrates the complex range of emotions and associations of the nigun. It is not so simple to decide whether this Yiddish song itself is joyful or sad. It appears to be both. A sense of mixed feelings is definitely its most prominent feature. This mix of feelings is transferred into the du-du-du nigun, stating that God can be found anywhere in both the positive and the negative experiences that a person goes through. Let's sum up. I attempted to outline the historical background of the emergence of the Hasidic musical tradition and the musical logic of the Nigunim, as well as touching on the emotions that these tunes are called upon to arouse. The Hasidic spiritual renovation applied to the power of music to disseminate nonverbal mystical messages to broad audiences. Soon after the emergence of the Hasidic movement in the second half of the 18th century, thousands of Hasidic melodies were created. This music was transmitted only orally until the turn of the 20th century, when the collectors of Jewish musical folklore, composers and musicians, as well as the Hasidim themselves, began to document these tunes as transcriptions and audio recordings. Hundreds of Nigunim can be found in the database that we saw, by the way, searchable in Google, Nigunim-Bim-Bom in one word, and you are there, and that was the short advert. Nigunim were always perceived as meaningful. As we saw, the new Hasidic teaching was itself compared to a kind of music whereas the transmission of this teaching from generation to generation was outlined as a prolonged dance, continuing despite all the barriers along the way. From the very beginning, it was clear that this music conveys a message. To receive this message, one didn't necessarily need to be educated. Rather, a special emotional talent, sensibility, and open-mindedness were required. Nigunim have their own characteristic features. First, a combination of diversity and restraint, moderation, and second, a multiplicity of affinities to different cultural realms, such as Jewish liturgical music, klezmer instrumental music that accompany Jewish weddings, and songs and dances of the surrounding people. Of all this, the klezmer influence is the most salient, and therefore the Hasidic repertoire should be considered as a new development of the old Eastern Ashkenazi tradition, rather than a completely new phenomenon. One of the most prominent images that this music represents is an image of a journey. It is reflected in the complex musical form, often comprised of 4 sections resembling the name of God. The unfolding of this musical form resembles a transition from one world to another. These ideas are found in numerous Hasidic teachings, and the challenge facing a listener or a performer of this music is to reveal them in the sounds and to resonate them. Hoping that our conversation might assist in meeting this challenge, I think I should stop here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so very much, Michael. It's such a joy to hear this history and to hear some of the music interspersed. Every song left me wanting to hear a little bit more. We do have a number of questions submitted, which is fantastic. I'm hoping that we can get through at least 3 or 4. I see that people are continuing to submit, so I'll keep an eye on that. The first thing that I want to raise up is you talked about Nigunim, but you also talked about klezmer. You also talked about Yiddish folk song. And there's also this category of zmirot that we hear people talk about sometimes. Can you clarify or elaborate a little bit on the differences between these different forms of Jewish music, religious and lay?
Well, this is a great question. Thank you very much. Yes, so we did mention here the cantors. Yes, at least I showed a picture of a cantor. So, and also Yiddish folk song, paraliturgical songs, Nigunim and Zmerot and klezmer music. And what is particularly interesting in this context is that the Yiddish speakers who settled in Eastern Europe maintained multiple dialogues both with their neighbors, with the surrounding musical traditions, and with other non-Eastern Ashkenazi Jewish traditions. And at the same time, they were able to develop their own idiosyncratic art. For example, the Yiddish folk songs were sung mainly inside the homes in Yiddish, the language that nobody understood, or maybe understood only minimally their neighbors of the Jews, the Ukrainian, the Belarusians, and the Polish people. And all these Slavic groups shared some big tradition of singing connected to the agricultural year, because they were mainly peasants, but Jews were not allowed to earn land. And this is why they would not participate in these singing agricultural songs. And this is why they developed their own tradition. And so also the Jewish klezmer music, klezmorim were, as I said, were semi-professional instrumentalists who developed their profession in these guilds, you know, and they would share some tunes with the Roma musicians, Gypsy musicians, and the other, but they would also play some music only for their internal Jewish weddings, or it was their own repertoire. So what is interesting about this, I think this multiplicity of dialogues and the possibility to be at the same time at different weddings, if I could say this, both the Slavic context and inner Ashkenazi.
So that actually leads to another question that several people have asked in different ways, having to do with the asking you to talk a little bit more about the close musical or aesthetic relationship between the Hasidic nigun, or the Hasidic way of performing music, and the surrounding culture. So what we think of as this distinctive sound of Hasidic song, is that in a way a kind of a snapshot of music of 18th century Ukraine, or is it different? What's the difference, and what are we seeing there?
Wow, this is another great question. Thank you so much. So there was an accepted narrative that the first generation of Hasidim, because of this innovation and because they wanted to create some new repertoire, and maybe they just took songs of the surroundings and just performed them. And only later on they developed their own repertoire. So to clarify this issue, in fact, we did some collaborative research with the Ukrainian musicologists, and we really compared hundreds of Hasidic nigunim and hundreds and thousands actually of Ukrainian songs, and we discovered that the shared features are minimal. And this is quite surprising. But as you said, I think that Hasidim and Yiddish speakers in general did not know this, had not known this way of collective loud singing before the Hasidism. So maybe this is, yes, a Slavic inspiration. And maybe there are more links, but this tradition of Hasidic nigunim more develops the inner klezmer tradition than other, regional co-territorial repertoires.
Okay, thank you so much. That's really interesting to hear. delving in there in then specifically to the form of singing without lyrics or with special syllables of lyrics. Some people are asking to hear a little bit more about the choice of those those non-lyric syllables, right? Does it make any difference in meaning or to expression? Are there writings about which syllables to use? How does that play out? I mean, it's not just humming. There are actually sounds being made, and one wonders if they're intentional and self-conscious about which ones are being used.
This is a wonderful question. Well, there were several attempts to really to understand what is the difference between Yam-Bim-Bom and Ai-Dee-Dai. So I can say with certain confidence that Chiri Biri Bom would be used only for the happy tunes and not for more sad or elevated or yearning tunes. But beyond that, we should keep in mind that all this culture, unfortunately, was destroyed in its local, Jewish Tetlach. All were destroyed in the Holocaust. So all what we have there are descendants of these communities, contemporary Hasidic communities, who, of course, are developing and continuing the same tradition, but still we don't have those informants who live there, and so it's complicated to understand today how this tradition really emerged and the choice of the syllables, how did it go. And I think this question will be studied more, maybe with the aid of the database that I showed to you, because it invites contemporary Hasidic experts to browse the tunes, to see them, and send us the information. So maybe we will gather some information saying this one, we only do Yam-Bim-Bom and never Ai-Dee-Dai. So come later and ask this question.
That was going to be my next question. So it sounds like that's not actually known for sure. So, but that's also a nice tie into the next question that I was going to bring, which was about this database. I linked to it in the chat, just so anybody who wants to go and explore it directly can find Nigunim-Bim-Bom.org. Someone posted a question about whether we can find musical notation of these songs. I think that's there in that database, right?
Yes.
Are there ways, can we interact with it? If you heard a song in synagogue that was particularly striking, is there a way to find it within that database? Or if there's a song that your grandfather used to sing, how can a layperson interact with this database?
Exactly, this is the idea, and this is the main challenge, of the browsing and retrieving this musical information, because once I say ABC song, in half a second, everybody knows what I'm talking about and the whole concept and the aesthetics of da 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 da. And with the Nigunim, it's much more complicated. If I really want to learn about the Nigunim, about which I know nothing, I would just call to my Hasidic friends and sing to them. What would you say? Yam-Bim-Bom-Bom-Bom, and then he would say, wait a minute, hold on, I'm talking to my friend, singing again, da, 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 and this is the way how we gather information. So now we are developing a new algorithm, and I really hope that it will be ready in half a year or maybe in a year, to whistle to a microphone or just query by humming or whistling. So just for this example, I heard something in the synagogue and I want to know about it more, or I remember an old tune. So you will be able to whistle and to find it. Currently, we can search for, first of all, we can browse the tunes and see the musical notation, and also hear. You can click on play button and just hear this music. And you can also look and search by musical characteristics like fast and slow and minor, major, and also by dynasties and Hasidic courts, Chabad, Vizhnitz, Lubavitch, etc. So meanwhile, only verbal ways of retrieval, but we are working on different ways.
It's a fascinating problem trying to figure out how to search it that way. I know we do have to let you go. We've passed our hour. I have one more question. I'm not to put you on the spot, but a couple of people have asked for suggestions for further reading. Are there any books or articles that you would recommend for to gain more knowledge about the history of Nigun and early Hasidic music?
Yes, there is important research. So I'm thinking of only sources in English.
Yeah.
Actually, there is a bibliography. You can go to Oxford bibliographers online and look for Jewish Eastern European folk music, and there is a vast bibliography there. But we have to one book that comes up now. It's by Eliyahu Schleifer, which is in English, published by Jewish Music Research Center in Jerusalem, which has explanations and music, and it's called The Anthology of Hasidic Music. It was compiled by Professor Eliyahu Schleifer based on a collection by Chemio Wiener. Yes, and there are much more, and there is a vast research on the contemporary Hasidic music, which is another topic, but I think I wouldn't go there because there are several important studies that I'm trying not to miss anybody.
Yeah, that's why I said I want to put you on the spot. But those two resources that you mentioned sound very, very helpful. And we can think about also posting other resources on, when we post this video on YouTube, maybe we can share some further suggestions. I know people are eager.
Yeah.
So with that, I want to thank you very, very sincerely. This has been a real pleasure listening to you and learning from you. And I want to thank everybody who attended. We had a good 150 people in the audience and lots of comments in the Q&A. So such a pleasure to see everyone here participating, thinking about the Jewish past and thinking about Jewish culture together. And I look forward to seeing you all back here again on November 16th, which is, I think, the date where we'll host Anna Sternschus talking about Yiddish songs and tunes composed during the Holocaust. So that'll be another great episode of this Nigun series. So again, thank you everyone so very much, and especially Michael Lukin.
Thank you.